I think we are.
What was that, Rachel?
Yep, I think we're good to go.
All right, sounds good. The recording part interrupted what you were saying. So, but just want to say welcome to everybody. And this is kind of a new adventure we're trying, talking about harvesting solutions. And really, when we think about Farm Bureau, uh, the thing that we do best is talk over issues and come up with solutions. And that's exactly what this is kind of designed to do. And so we've got some experts both within our membership and outside of our membership that we're going to hear from today on childcare. And so with that, I just want to thank everybody for taking time for this, and then turn it over to Rachel Peterson, who has some firsthand knowledge on childcare issues.
Parent is getting to have firsthand experience with some of these things. I am the leadership coordinator with Minnesota Farm Bureau, and I'm very excited for today on our harvesting solutions. Dr. Ann Bailey has of experience in the field of education and special education, specifically and dissemination at regional and national levels, as well as teaching, research, and training development. She oversees the research and is currently working on evaluation planning and research early childhood literacy and childcare systems. So with that, hand over the presentation to Dr. Bailey.
Thank you. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, everybody. I'm Ann Bailey. As Rachel said, I direct the Center for Early Education and Development at the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities. I would tell you I'm originally from Wahpeton, North Dakota, so I'm fairly familiar with the Farm Bureau. So I was so pleased to be asked to join you today. I'm going to do a brief presentation. I certainly hope that at any point in time if you have questions, either put them in the chat or ask them outright. I prefer to keep things, relatively informal. And please call me Ann. I only make my older siblings call me Dr. Bailey. Other than that, nobody else calls me that. So please refer to me as Ann. And like I said, I'm going to present you some data and some things I know that are going on in the state. But please jump in with your experience, your knowledge at any point in time. All right, hopefully, can you see my screen? Rachel, I'm looking at you. Can you see my PowerPoint? Okay, I can't see everybody's faces when I'm presenting. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today, just give you an idea about. Oh, here we go. So I just want to introduce you a little bit to the Center for Early Education and Development. So we've been around for 50 years. We're just going into our 51st year. We were created 50 years ago this is a quote from the original director of SEED, to give child development away. Meaning that we do all this research on child development and all aspects of child development at the university, but how do we get it to the people who really need it? So we are a center within the Institute for Child Development. We are entirely funded by grants and foundations. So we have state projects, we have some federal projects, and then some foundational research projects. Our overarching goal is to support the early childhood workforce. And when we say workforce, we take a very wide view of that. So that means childcare providers, whether they're in their home or at a center. That means Head Start providers. That means school-based providers, so early childhood family ed, early childhood education, and early childhood special ed. We also do projects for child protection workers to make sure they have high quality early childhood content knowledge. And we do that through a bunch of different avenues of work. So one of the things we do is quite a bit of research and evaluation.
You having such a good day?
Oh,
Yeah.
Can somebody put themselves on mute?
What?
I don't know who it is, but Rachel or whoever is controlling the Zoom, I think you can mute people too, please. We do a statewide project on the early childhood program quality. So what's the quality of the programs that children have and families have available to them? We do, as Rachel said, create a lot of professional development. So we have some in-person, but most of our professional development now is online. And then we do a lot of work around the evidence-based practice called reflective practice, which is meant, I won't go into it all, but it's meant to reduce burnout and job stress for those who work in early childhood and other fields. So I want to start by just giving you a national picture. Some of this you may know, some of it you may not. But again, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to jump in. I don't know how many people knew, but prior to the onset of COVID, there were already huge problems with staffing shortages and turnover in the early childhood field. And the second bullet says it all. It's we talk about, you know, it can be an expensive degree, and then to come out and make $12 an hour to get a 4-year degree it just doesn't work. So low wages, and of course, then not being satisfied with those wages, complete lack of benefits. Some centers may give benefits, but if you're a family or a home-based provider, usually lack of benefits, really long hours, no advancement opportunities, oftentimes poor working environments, moving from classroom to classroom if you're in a center. All these have been going on for quite some time and have only been enhanced since the pandemic. One of the things we know, and again, I cited you an article, but teacher or whether it's for infants, toddlers, or preschoolers, turnover affects the relationship that they have with those they care. And so turnover has been directly linked to lower quality of care and also poorer child outcomes for kids. So, and across the board, poorer outcomes, not just poorer outcomes in one developmental domain. So that was the national picture. The Minnesota data, and again, I've provided you with references, but if you want me to send you any afterwards, I'm happy to do that too. Prior to the pandemic, Minnesota was already short 80,000 slots for kids. So that was in 2020. It's only gotten worse. We definitely have seen a greater decline in providers, especially those providers who are family child care providers out of their home, or sometimes they have part of their home is their child care, but we've seen a big decline there. You can see the cost of childcare for families is often untenable, especially as you look at costs for infants and toddlers. So the data provided in bullet 3, 14,400, that's across the whole state. In the metro area, it ranges closer to 16,800, which is often more than people's mortgages. So, and again, I provided you with data, the difference between how much it costs based on the age of the child, as well as whether or not, if they're in a center or if they're in a home-based care situation. The average take-home salary for any early childhood or childcare provider is somewhere around $28,000, close to $29,000. So I feel like a little bit Debbie Downer today, but I want you to have a realistic picture of what's going on in Minnesota. A lot of what I'm providing you to is not just specific to Minnesota. It is a nationwide, there's a nationwide crisis. So this is a map from 2017. So again, pre-pandemic, where you can already see the lack of slots available by regions. Now, one of the things I want to point out is that the data shared here are for licensed childcare providers. So whether it's centers or home-based, these are licensed. It does not include those what we refer to in our field as family, friends, and neighbors. those childcares who may not be licensed, or there's another category of provider called legally non-licensed. So they're not licensed, but if they do some of the a little less paperwork and some of the professional development, you can become legally non-licensed provider and still access some of the services provided by the state for childcare. You can see again, this is 2017. Hopefully you're all very familiar with the Center for Rural Policy and Development. They have great reports on childcare, especially in rural areas. So here are data that I found post-pandemic. We continue to see a large decline in home-based providers in rural Minnesota. The data demonstrated that the metro area also had decline in home-based providers, but the number of centers that have opened, excuse me, has mediated some of the lack of slots. That's not true in rural Minnesota. So there just has been a decline and no new slots are opening necessarily. There was quite a bit of funding for childcare providers with the, no, I just forgot the acronym, the Reinvestment Act, ARP. I'm sorry if anybody remembers what the acronym stands for, but the Reinvestment Act provided a whole bunch of money specifically targeted at childcare providers, knowing that during the pandemic especially, those who were essential employees needed childcare so that they could go and do their jobs. Minnesota is one of 11 states, including the District of Columbia, that has opted to use state funding to replace those dollars. Most other states, so all the other states not listed, are the term that is used frequently is called the childcare cliff. They had those funds to supplement income, to support the buying of resources that they needed to maintain health and safety in centers and in homes. So most of the other states are, like I said, they use the term childcare cliff, that once those ARP dollars go away, which is any time now, there's an expectation that most states will see a rapid decline in the number of childcare providers. And I'm sorry if you can hear a dog toy in the background, because my dog has decided now is a great time to play. So I apologize for that, but I work from home a lot. One of the, one of the things that, of course, affects childcare providers is just the inflation that we've seen. We're all seeing higher grocery prices, higher rent. Certainly, if you are working in a center, there's the expectation that you need to pay your staff more. So that's taking its toll. And then just the lack of the workforce and turnover, the stress of taking care of children who were home for many years and not in a childcare setting. So the transition to childcare has sometimes been challenging for families and children. Some of my colleagues who do coaching of childcare providers are talking, they've used the term that they're seeing a lot more bigger behaviors, that children are acting in more obvious and frustrated ways. And some of that they attribute to the fact that they were home for several years and now transitioning to childcare. Certainly wages has been a big issue, as I mentioned. If you can make $12 an hour in a childcare, but you can make 16 at Menards or 14 at Walmart, what's the draw of dealing with behaviors and cleaning up all the time and diapers? And so we've seen a lot of loss in the workforce from that. And as I mentioned, job-related stress and certainly education. The education of the childcare workforce is highly variable. So we have providers that have a high school diploma. There's something called the Child Development associate degree or the CDA that people often get. They might have a 2-year degree, and we have some that have master's degrees. But most likely, I would say the average degree is as a associate's degree or less. So that was sort of the state of the workforce. Now, what about the options for families? One of the things that some of my colleagues and I are currently, we're actually writing a federal grant right now to study more intensely the need for infant toddler slots in rural Minnesota. So infants and toddlers, as you saw earlier, they cost more. And typically what happens is, so if I'm a family childcare provider, I can only have at max 2 infants. I can have, I think, 4 toddlers. You can only have so many numbers of each age range of children in your home. And there are different capacities when you're in a center. Infants and toddlers cost a lot more to care for. So one of the things we're seeing is that family childcare providers may say, nope, sorry, I only deal with preschoolers. Because then you only have to have preschool toys, preschool learning, curriculum, and you can have more children, hence, and then more money to come in. So we're seeing a decline in the number of infant toddler slots. And then also, hopefully you're seeing that there are more programs statewide for preschool children. So the voluntary pre-K program that Minnesota has opened up options. There's certainly Head Start and other school-based programs that are often free. So there are more options once you get to the preschool level, but infants and toddlers, it's much harder to find slots for them. And like I said, it's very costly to both parents and the providers. The other thing we know just in general is that parents have very different childcare needs now. Oftentimes people can work a hybrid schedule, so they could be home part of the time and in an office. And parents report that they need infant toddler care more often than they need preschool care. I want to talk a little bit. I feel like I'm racing through these. Does anybody have any questions at this point? I don't see anything in the chat. So, but if there is something in the chat, if somebody wants to read it to me, that would be great. Nope. Okay. So Minnesota, I will say this. So I want to end on or get close to, I think I'm close to ending, on a very positive note, which is that Minnesota has a lot of programming to not only encourage childcare people to come into the childcare workforce and also keep them there. So I want to go through some of the different options that are available. So if you know anybody that is thinking about opening a childcare business or a center, there are plenty of programs to help them. One is the Childcare Wayfinders, and they are relatively new, I would say in the last 2 to 3 years. It's funded by the Department of Human Service, and they are there to assist providers who either are new to the field and or thinking about coming into the field with licensing and regulations, business and financial programming, because oftentimes I think people think, well, I like kids and I could take care of kids as a profession, but they don't necessarily think about the fact that now they are a business owner. So there is support for things like opening your own business. Empower to Educate is a program run by Childcare Aware. They provide educational opportunities. So people who want to advance their careers, maybe want to go from having a child development associate to an AA degree from a local community college. The Empower to Educate program will help support the costs and help people find programming that suits their needs. One of the most interesting things that has occurred in the last year to me is the dual training pipeline and including childcare in that program. It's part of the Department of Labor and Industry work. Up until this last year, it focused more on agriculture, health, manufacturing, and basically earn and learn program. So mentoring and on-the-job training. Childcare has been recently added to that. So there will be opportunities for businesses who want to help support childcare in an earn and learn environment to get financial and other supports from the state. The kind of, well, I'll say sad, the harder part of the dual training pipeline is that it's not a workable solution for home-based childcare providers because they often don't have employees. So they can't afford to pay somebody to come in and earn and learn. So it works better for centers than it does for home-based, but that doesn't mean it's home-based providers are being excluded. The team at the Department of Labor and Industry is working with a host of stakeholders to make sure that home-based providers can be included in that programming as well. We have seen an increase in subsidy payments. So there is more opportunity for people to get financial support to pay for their childcare. That is run also through the Department of Human Service. Right now, Minnesota is revising its childcare regulations, hopefully to make things still of high quality, but easier for people to manage. There are more supports for those who are, like I said, family, friends, and neighbors, which oftentimes, again, in rural areas, we see more family, friends, and neighbor care providers. And then there are at least 3 or 4 mentoring programs so that if you come into the field, you can have somebody, either another peer or a professional who can help you navigate the opening of your center or your home-based program to stay in it. The business aspects of it, there's First Children's Finance provides support, the fiscal and business support as well. So there are a lot of great things going on in Minnesota. What we don't have great knowledge about is, do people know about all these programs? And if so, are they using them? Because they are available statewide. Suzanne Pearl is the director of First Children's Finance here in Minnesota, and she works closely with the federal bank to put out a number of policy briefs. And she recently said, if the childcare sector fails, the rest of the economy follows. So with more women in the workforce and the kinds of jobs available, childcare it's part of the economy, and it's a critical part of the economy. All right, that's all I was going to share today. Do you have questions or comments? Hopefully I can answer. I won't guarantee that I can. And then I can share this PowerPoint. I did share it with Pam. So Pam, if anybody wanted to have a copy of it, they'd be welcome to. My contact information is also on here. And I would highly encourage you all to, if you're interested in not only childcare, but what's going on in the childcare workforce, to look at our website at seed.umn.edu.
And I have a question.
Please.
I have 3 children, and I have experienced all different types of childcare. We've had a nanny. I've done an in-home provider as well as a childcare center. And I guess when you're talking to childcare providers, I hear it from the parent perspective, from the providers, some of the challenges they've had to go through. And I think with COVID, that's been far more extreme with cleaning requirements, et cetera. What are you hearing from providers that are barriers for their success, or why they're maybe exiting the industry? And then we've also, kind of a 2-part question, we've been queued up to some of the rule changes that are going to be proposed probably to the state legislature this next year about some additional requirements and changes to how in-home providers are regulated. And I feel like what I've heard was that regulations were a lot of the reasons why sometimes providers had exited the business. And I'm just curious if you would concur with that, or what you're hearing that are barriers, specific things that maybe are unreasonable with the regulations.
Great questions. Thank you. I honestly, I don't know a ton about what's in the new regulations. I've been on somewhat of the periphery of that. So I can't speak to what's coming up, but I can say one of the things we study, so like I said, we have a partnership right now, myself and my research colleagues have a partnership with Liz Davis and her colleague at the Department of Applied Economics, because we recognize that there's an economic aspect to childcare, but there's also a practical, what does this look like in the field aspect? And that's kind of where we come in. Certainly, you know, some of the barriers I already listed, I'll iterate. The low wages is a huge thing. Again, if I can check out at Menards or Fleet Farm and not have to deal, and I don't mean this negatively, but not have to deal with a whole lot of people, like, you know, a parent's not getting mad at me because their clothes weren't clean at the end of the day, or, you know, or they didn't want to hear that their children is struggling. That's a lot different than $12 an hour and cleaning up and following all the regulations. One of the things we study at SEED is what we call administrative burden. So that's what in the research, that's what it's referred to as. And it certainly gets to some of what you were saying, the burden to participate in licensing. So that alone, it is, especially think about it if somebody's just coming out of high school and doesn't have a whole lot of experience, trying to understand state licensing regulations can be very challenging. On top of that, if you want to participate in like the subsidy program, that's a whole nother ballgame of paperwork and a different department at the Department of Human Service. And so we are looking at, in a study right now that we're doing, we are looking at some of that administrative burden and seeing if that's driving people to leave or to just not participate, because that's another option that people are saying licensing isn't worth it because the need is still there, right? But licensing, you know, I understand why people would not want to be licensed, and yet it is a marker of quality, right? So that a parent would know, I can expect at the minimum these things from this provider because they are licensed. And they do have support and oversight from licensors in the field. So I'm not sure I answered all your questions, but hopefully, I mean, that's your example is just one of so many. Like, I've had to try a million different things to make sure that my kids were cared for.
Yeah, I thought you did a great job answering my
Oh,
question.
thank you.
We did have a question in the comment here. It's maybe a statement. That one of our members' son and daughter-in-law work 10 to 12-hour shifts. So finding care early in the morning, particularly, is a challenge. School-aged care programs aren't early enough, but they do work otherwise. So, and I think that was the other thing we experienced with the variety of different providers was an in-home's hours might be a smaller window because it's one person. Whereas
Right.
a childcare center, the hours were earlier and later, and there was a larger range. But obviously those
And
spots
still might not cover the needs that, you know, people who work shift work have, right? I can tell you from personal experience, I have now, he is a almost 26-year-old nephew. When he was 6 months old, I was floundering in graduate school the first time and kind of unsure of what I wanted to do. And my sister, who was a nurse in an emergency department, and my brother-in-law, who at the time was a police officer who worked night shifts, said, "You think you can move here and help us?" And so I did. I packed up and I moved, and I mean, they were lucky, right? I just, right place, right time. I loved being with him. I got a 9-to-5 job, and between the three of us, we were able to work it out. But those who work shifts, I mean, they're really between a rock and a hard place, and that's where the family, friends, and neighbors really do come into play. Or what we're also seeing is women leaving, more often women than men, but parents leaving the workforce because it's more economically feasible to stay at home than it is to have the job and pay for the childcare to cover.
I have a question.
Please.
Can you elaborate or talk a little bit? Has there been any research or any looking into the impact on children and the turnover in daycare? You know, I had a kid who just exited daycare. He's in kindergarten this year. And we were at 3 different centers throughout his time in daycare. And he would come home and get really attached to a teacher, and we would get no notification. That teacher would just, you know, be there on a Wednesday, not be there on a Thursday, and be gone. And it really impacted him. So has there been any kind of research on that impact on the child development because of this?
There absolutely has been. In one article I cited, it just came out in 2024, but is exactly what you said, that there are negative outcomes for children because that teacher-child relationship is so critical to child development. It's not even, well, I don't even need to use the word teacher. Caregiver, whether it's a parent, a guardian, a child care provider, a teacher, but that caregiver child relationship is at the core of all good child development. So if there is constant turnover, that usually what we see is an increase in we're trying to get away from using challenging behaviors, because oftentimes it's the adults who have the challenging behaviors and the kids are just trying to tell you how they feel, but they don't have the skills yet, right? So, but we see more behaviors that are disruptive and hard for the child and the adult. We definitely see lower developmental outcomes in, like I said, behavior, in their overall learning, literacy, numeracy, because those relationships are so critical to child development. And we're seeing that. I mean, Rachel, the example you gave, that's everywhere. That even if we see them on Wednesday and she's not there on Thursday, what we're also seeing is, especially in centers, like, okay, well, we have this number of kids in this room, so we need this teacher to go from infants to toddlers, and then this teacher. And so kids are like, who's this? Why is she here? Or why is he here? And even that kind of disruption affects children.
And then one other question, has there
Please.
been any look into like childcare? You know, we use the term food deserts when we talk about food insecurity. Are there child care deserts and how that's being addressed? And the example I can give is, I used to live in Roseville. When I learned that a viable pregnancy, we went immediately to find a daycare because we knew we had to secure a spot. There was one within a certain mile radius of our home. I moved to Egan now. We live in Egan, and there's 5 daycare centers within that same mile radius that we were looking in Roseville. So how are those deserts kind of being looked at and approached?
So I just put a website into the chat myself. My colleagues, Liz Davis and Aaron Sojourner. Aaron he's an economist. No, he might be an economist too. He used to work at the Carlson School of Management, but now he works for Upjohn Institute. But the two of them created this website with a lot of help from others called childcareaccess.org. And you can see by city, by county in Minnesota, where the deserts are. It's like live data. It's amazing, I think, to see where the deserts are. If you go on there now, I'll tell you, again, you'll see it all over rural Minnesota. The metro still, there's not enough slots, but it's not as desperate as it is outside of the metropolitan area.
And I have a question related to, we're seeing a lot of school-aged care was mentioned, a lot of school districts that are providing extended either before and after care, or they're going down into kind of that daycare space for younger children. Has that seemed to be a trend that is proving some good results and, freeing up some vacancies for infants and the really young toddlers?
There's yes and no. So there is evidence that family child care providers or home-based child care providers are bothered by the addition of like voluntary pre-K, or if Minnesota would have like pre-K for all, right? For all 4-year-olds, if that somehow became funded by the legislature. Family child care providers are often not for that. They're not, or they might be for it, but they're not happy about it. And the reason is, like I said, it's an economical issue for them because infants and toddlers cost more and they can't have as many infants and toddlers in their care as they can preschoolers. And often the preschoolers and what they bring in for the number of preschoolers offsets the cost of the infants and toddlers for them to still come out with $28,000 a year, right? So yes, they might end up having more infants and toddler slots, but they wouldn't make enough money, or they have to start charging the parents, and the parents are already saying, this is so expensive, like I can't afford this. So it's so challenging, the whole system, to look at the whole system and see kind of the pros and cons of all these different decisions made. Thank you, Marlon. That was very nice of you.
I have a question on the programs you mentioned, like the Wayfinders, Empower to Educate, and the dual training pipeline. You said you don't really know yet how they're being promoted or if people are participating in them, but do you know what is being done right now to promote them or what holes there are
So
people know about it?
We don't know a ton. I don't want to speak for my colleagues at, like, we partner often with Childcare Aware of Minnesota. There are a number of other childcare agencies that run these programs, and I am not fully aware of how they market. I do know that certainly the licensors are county-based, and licensing is often a way for information to get to providers. And those providers and centers who have good relationships with their licensors can make all the difference in the world. So, and hopefully there are also childcare associations. So they may be regionally based, they may be county based, where especially home-based providers can find support, because home-based childcare provision, it can be very lonely. If you think about it, you're the only adult in your home all day with children. You maybe get a half an hour to, during nap time to eat or go to the bathroom or clean up after, and then there are all these programs available, mentoring programs, coaching programs to help you do better. But when do you have time to do that? Also, is it during the nap time or so? I just have a lot of sympathy. I've never done that. I've worked in preschool programs, but I can't fathom what it would be like to be a home care provider. And the people that I know who do it, like, it's so a part of who they are, and they so love it that they're willing to settle, this is my opinion, but they are willing to take the not great pay because they love what they do so much. So we're hoping to see some more pay parity in the future, because if we don't value, we pay what we value, and childcare has been underpaid and undervalued for probably since its inception.
I don't think we talk enough either about how in-home childcare providers are providing this out of their own home.
Mm-hmm.
And just, I mean, I know what my house looks like and my kids are only there a few hours a day, like bring in other children and
Right.
like that's their place where they live too.
Well, and often they have their own families. So they're working 12 hours a day with other people's kids, and then they have their own children and they're wanting to spend time with them, and think about the emotional energy it takes. One of the things there are data on that, reliable data that say that typically for home-based providers, most home-based providers have another adult in the home that makes the money, that has the benefits, and that's why they can be there and do home care. Otherwise, they couldn't manage it.
And you kind of touched on this with answering Pam's question, but we have had two in-home daycares in two different counties. And you could see the difference in the now I'm forgetting the word, the licensing between the two counties. It was dramatic, the difference, and the regulation that it seems like there were, because one was a more rural county and the other was a more city-based county. So do you see this being a solution? We go to the state level and it works down, or is it something that we go to county level with licensing and try to get it to find solutions there and then work up?
That's a really good question. I will tell you, oftentimes, the reason most of the time we see from the state level down is because that's how the funds are administrated, right? So most of the funds for the licensing and all the things that come out, all the programs that come out of the Department of Human Service, Child Development Services, are through the Child Development Block Grant. So they flow that money through and then it comes that way. So that's why we see programming often. That's not to say that local programming can also force the hand of what happens at the state. So I am a fan of both. Like I like to see people trying new things outside the box that works for their region, their county, their city. Oftentimes it needs to include business leaders. It can't just be the people that have young children. It has to be the whole village, right? Do you like I always ask, who do you want as your neighbor? Do you want somebody that got quality childcare, that has good health outcomes? Like who do you want working for you? And the benefits to early care and education are astronomical if they're done well. So, and there's 30, 40 years of data on that. But it takes the whole village. It can't just be parents of young children advocating for more, for better.
I think that is a great point to make and a really good reason why we have to work together as a whole for the solution, not just when it's affecting you for 3 to 4 years. And why it's so important for our entire membership to see why this is an issue across greater Minnesota. So on that as well, what do you see as the average person, what they can do to be a part of the solution? Is it talking in your community? Is there a surefire, you should show up on this day to do this thing? What's the most achievable thing that a busy parent can do to try and help this be a solution?
That's a very good question. One of the things I always will advocate for is talking to your local representatives, whether that's state level representatives or your mayor or your county supervisor, all of the different levels of local government, and asking, like, what do we know about this in this region? Certainly I gave you that the childcareaccess.org website. You can look where you live and see, and you can show that at your city council meeting or your county commissioner meetings. So I think that's a good place to start. I think also, especially for anybody who's passionate about this, see if there's an association in your neck of the woods and reach out to them. Tell them that, find out from them directly, what would they say they need? Because it's not gonna, we have all these data, but it doesn't tell the story of the person living in, Breckenridge in Wilkin County. So, one of the things that we're doing in one of our research projects right now that is a federally funded one is we will be doing interviews with parents and providers about, why do you participate in the subsidy program, or why don't you? What is it about it? So that we can hear those stories, because survey data tell you about this much of the picture. And so most of the research that we do at SEED, we say it's mixed methods. So we do some survey, but we also do interviews. We'll do focus groups, because that fills in the details of the story. And frankly, I think that's more powerful. So if you can, get to know the providers in your area, hear their stories, hear from them. What do they need? It might be very different across, even like we're having trouble defining what's rural because, right? And that's true in every state, but it's going to be different everywhere you live, and there'll be common themes. They're going to tell you that they're poorly paid and the hours are long and they have no benefits, but there might be something very specific that could be done for that region or that area.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
and we do a lot of work that way too, where we encourage our members to work locally. So it's a good fit for what we are used to doing,
Good.
that we could continue to try to work on solutions for this as well.
Well, I'm so grateful that you all had questions. I was worried that I was going to present and then like crickets.
No, this is a topic that I think most parents are very passionate about. It's something you want to provide the best for your kids. It's something that parents stress over. And even when you know you have a good daycare provider, childcare provider, you're stressing about, well, maybe they won't be here in a couple months, or what if they're sick? Like I said, we have home daycare provider. So if she is sick, if she needs to take time off to have an appointment or go on vacation, she doesn't have a substitute. So we have to figure it out. And
And
she's
she
great.
typically doesn't get paid during that time either, right? So
Yeah. So, and we want her to take that time. She deserves it, but it's just figuring out the logistics around everything. So it's a
Yep.
stressor on both ends for sure.
Absolutely.
And Anne, of course, you got questions from a lot of the moms on the call, so maybe there's others, but one of the comments I've heard from a couple of our members who are grandparents is that sometimes that childcare burden falls on them, which they're happy to do, but because there aren't other options, or because maybe it's just a summer, filling the summer because they're out of school and there's not a school program, and very rarely are there spots just for the summer at different places. So and I appreciated the comment you had about childcare and education, and that good childcare and good education benefit the whole community. And one of the things we've been focusing on here is trying to get people excited about careers in agriculture and starting that at a younger age. And maybe a 4-year school isn't the option for everyone, and maybe we need to broaden that messaging to just other careers that are a great opportunity to give back to your community, to stay in your area of choice, not have to attend a 4-year degree if you don't want to, and giving them some maybe on the job experience while they're going through their secondary school.
Yep. I would highly recommend, if you haven't already, check out that dual training pipeline that is offered by the Department of Labor and Industry. Dan Solomon and Kathleen Gordon are the two people that I've worked most closely with. And wow, am I impressed by their efforts and their initiatives. And that's the same message, right? Like, take it from me, who has spent more time in college than I probably should have because I really liked school. Not everybody belongs in a not everybody needs a 4-year degree. Not everybody, it's not a good fit for everybody. And so certainly, and as somebody who grew up in a town with a community college that had great and still continues to have great education for low money, and 2 years and you can get a good job, right? So there are a lot of options out there. That dual training pipeline, I think, is solely intended to help agriculture, like I said, manufacturing, healthcare, bring people in to show them here's what's available. And now childcare has been added, and there were a couple others that have been added as well, and I can't remember them off the top of my head. But if you go to their website, you'll see all the programs that they support. I think that's a fantastic initiative.
Thank you, Anne. Does anyone else have any other questions or any other stories that they would want to share, testimonials that would the rest of us understand what is going on with childcare?
Well, I'll just end by saying there are, as much as I provided you with some harrowing data, both nationally and statewide, there are a lot of good initiatives happening. And at the very least, the recognition is there that this is a crisis. And it's there at the state level. I think it's there at the local level. I hope it is. It's definitely there at the national level. And so I expect additional programs, projects, research to be coming that support bringing people into the field and helping them stay there.
Rachel lost her video. We're having internet issues here, I think. I so appreciate your coming and joining us. And our goal with this whole series was to make sure that, you know, our members understand this issue from a couple different angles, because it seems to be coming up more and more as our members are struggling with this issue. Rural communities are struggling with this issue. And I think you gave us a lot to think about, even if it's doom and gloom. And maybe it's just helping us to figure out how deep this issue is and how much work really will need to go into trying to come up with solutions that can directly impact people that live in Minnesota and make positive contributions.
Well, again, thank you for asking me to join you today. It was my pleasure, truly my pleasure.
Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.